Okay, so I just want to show you one of the files, general logic. Okay, so if everyone just opens that up. The game, there's a load of stuff already set up that like loads up your assets and everything, and I'll show you that later. But in here is where the title screen, which is what you were currently seeing, is created. Okay, now I've called it show title. You can use the picker at the top of any of the file menu selectors. Okay, so if you just look up at the top, and it'll show you all the things in your project. Anything that's grayed out isn't in the file you're currently looking at. Anything that's in like normal writing, like these ones, is in this file. But you can go to any of these, so I could just click on there and it'll take me to the file. That's quite handy. It's alphabetical, which makes finding stuff a bit easier. So I want show title. Right, so just looking at this, so that is the line of code that says show the debug information. If you want to turn that off, you can just set that to, if you delete the equals, it'll say, right, this is debug information, so I'll give you some clue on the debugger. So I'm going to say debug, and then it gives me a list. So these are all the different things you can show. So I'm going to say, all I want to know is, I'm going to put it on sprites, because I want to make sure that my sprite's going to be tracked by the engine. So I'm just going to change it to that. This line runs a subroutine that I've created. Now, if you want to know what it's doing, you can right click on this and say peak definition. And what it does is it opens a little window that lets you just look at what code's going on. Basically, these are just commands to tell the engines to get rid of everything they're doing. Which, as you move between different modes, you won't want, if you're playing your game and you want to go back to the title screen, you actually want to get rid of all the sprites that are on the screen. You don't have to. If you want to actually put the title screen on top of your game while the game's still playing, you can do that if you want, but it wouldn't look very good. Okay, unless you're trying to be cool or something. Alright, so I've created a few of these where I've lumped together standard things that you want to do, like get rid of everything. Alright, so you can look at those. If you move your mouse over, you'll get a little bit of help, because I bothered to write some comments. And it tells you what they all do. Okay. And close that to do that. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a sprite that's going to be moved around with the keyboard, which a lot of you might want to do. Alright, you can change this and edit it for Joypad. So we're going to say, and we're going to get Visual Studio to do a load of work for us here, creating files and stuff. So we're going to say new, what should we call it? I'm going to call it controlled sprite. So I'm going to type that. One thing that you'll have to get used to with C# is semicolons and curly braces, but we'll come back to curly braces. Semicolon just says that is the end of a statement, end of a line of code. That's all it means. That's why you see them all the time. It'll generate an error, but we're going to be clever. We're going to right click on that error and we're going to say generate, and we're going to do class. So once you've typed in the name, have you, alright Josh? Right, have you typed that in show title? Right click on that, say generate class. And it'll do a ridiculous amount of work for us. If it's worked, it'll go blue and you'll see it's opened a new file for us. It's actually created a file called controlled sprite. So it's used that name. Okay. Right, we're going to be using the engine. Now at the top, these using lines are libraries. It's saying include these libraries. Okay, it puts a load of standard ones in, but it doesn't put the ones we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the general logic tab and we're going to scroll right to the top. And we're going to copy all the X and A libraries and include my engine one as well. We're just going to copy that. So that was just general logic, and we're going to put it at the top of here. Okay. Right, so to create this sprite, a sprite is something that's defined by the game engine, but we're going to add some extra function because we're going to control a sprite. A sprite is just a moving animated object. Okay, so on this line, we're going to put public in front, and then we're going to put a colon at the end, and we're going to say sprite. So what we're saying is, yeah, we're gonna nick what the sprite does, what Eric bothered to write for a sprite, but we're going to add some extra stuff because we want to be able to control this sprite. Now you'll notice the braces. The braces mark the begin and end of a block. So you know, like when we did VB last year, and you had like end sub and end if, yeah, and next and things like that. It's just a marker. Every code that we write has to be in between braces. So make sure you're on that next line. Okay, so in between. If you've gone a bit odd and you've gone and done this, and you start trying to put some code in, you'll start seeing that the picker's got some weird stuff in it. Okay, none of it looking like the proper stuff. And you'll get an error. So if I like try and put some code here, so if I put something like this, you see, it doesn't even know what I'm talking about. It's putting real gibberish in there, and I'll get an error, and you'll get errors like this. If you ever have namespace errors, it's because you've not put your code in the right place. All right. Right. So we're going to put in here. So we're going to create. So we're going to say public, and this is what we call a constructor. Okay, when we say that new controlled sprite, this is the code that's run. So this is where we're going to define the basic stuff for the sprite. So again, I've got braces that mark the begin and end. Now, Visual Studio 2013 is actually tries to be quite nice to you. So if I open a brace, it puts the other one in for me. I don't want it on that line, so I just press enter. Okay, so it's trying to be quite nice here, so don't let it like screw you up. Right, so standard yes, David. You alright? I'll come and have a look in a sec. Right, the first thing we need to do with any sprite is we need to tell the engine that it exists. Okay, so we're going to say gm dot, which is how we access all the game objects. Use the picker. I want the engine manager, so I want engine m dot, and then I want to add a sprite. So I'm using the picker. I'm trying not to type too much because everything is case sensitive. And I'm going to add this sprite. This is how we refer to the item we're working with. So we say this. So add this. That will now force the game engine to manage our sprite for us. It's not going to show us much because we haven't got a graphic for it, but we're going to do that now. So we're going to say we're going to say frame on the next line, define. And you can generate graphics for your sprites different ways. Okay? So we've got define, which is the standard one, but you can actually create a video sprite. So you can play video in a sprite and then move your sprite around if you wanted to. Okay? So we're just going to use define. The other thing, as you're using the engine, you'll see that there are multiple versions of the same methods. So this is the define method, which lets us specify the graphic, but there are 6. It says 1 of 6. I'm going to use the basic one to start with. Okay, so I'm just going to use a graphic that already exists in the game engine. So I'm going to say gm dot engine manager, and then I'm going to put tx, and that will show me all the textures that the game engine's got. So I'm going to use target, which is just a little T symbol. I've got a squiggle at the end, which is saying it expects to put a semicolon there, so I put one. It could have put it itself because it knew. Okay. Right, that's as much as we need to do just to get a graphic on screen. But it'll be in the top left-hand corner, so you'll only see a quarter of it. So if we run this, just press F5 to run it. And you should see in the top left hand corner that you've got some sort of thing. And the engine's saying it's updated a sprite, there's one active, and it's being drawn. Okay, so if you press escape, I've set this up so if you press escape it'll quit. And we'll go a little bit further. Right, so back to our controlled sprite. So I'm going to set the X position. So I'm going to put it in the centre of the screen to start with. And I can do that by referring to the screen size. So I can say centre.x. Put my semicolon. And I'm going to set the Y value in the same way. Now one thing you'll have to get used to, the Y coordinate at the top is 0, at the bottom is larger. So as the number gets bigger for the Y, you move down the screen. Which is the exact opposite to graphs. Okay, so once I've set that position, I can run it again. And you'll see that it sits in the middle of the screen. Okay, so that's just like a basic graphic that's defined inside the game engine. Right, I'm now going to add something that's going to allow us to move it around. And I'm going to leave it there, and then I'm going to let you experiment with stuff. Okay? On Wednesday, because we're lucky and we get 2 lessons, on Wednesday I'll show you how to add your own graphic. And then it obviously makes it a little bit more real then. Right, so we want to... This is just the basic setup. This is all being taped, remember, so you can watch it back. Right, I want to be able to now, when the user presses some keys, move this character about. Okay, so I need to set that up. So I'm going to say on update, so still in the constructor for controlled sprite, plus equals, and then I'm going to say, right, I'm going to just call it input. Or get, I'm going to say get input. Get input. You can call them anything, you can call what you want. Right, that doesn't exist, which is why we're getting a squiggle. But we're going to right click on it and we're going to say generate method stub. And it'll create it for us. Now what we're setting up to happen here is whenever the engine updates the sprite for us, it'll say, is there anything you want to do yourself, any custom jobs? Oh, I'll do that for you then. Okay, and it does it. And it'll run this subroutine, which by default gets this error message put in it. Okay, but we're going to replace this and we're going to put some control code in. So we're going to do some decisions. We're going to say if gm.inputManager key down. There's lots of different ways in which you can interpret the keyboard. Key down just means someone's holding the key down. If you do key pressed, you mean previously the key was up and someone has just pressed it. If you do key up, that means it was previously down but now it's up. If you're doing a game like track and field, you need to know things like that. So you've got to decide whether, if you're doing a shoot 'em up and you say shoot a bullet whenever they hold the key down, you will get 100 bullets generated a second, which you might not want. Unless you want a laser effect, because that's what you'll get. Alright? So you've got to make a decision on that. There are other things you can do. You can bring timers in and things like that. But we're just going to say key down. Then we open a bracket and it's saying, he's trying to help us. It's saying, right, you've got to specify a key. So we say keys dot, and then we can specify the key. So I'm just going to do the left cursor key. Press enter to use the picker. Right, so I'm saying if that is true, then what I want to do is I want to move the X position of the sprite, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say X, left means going that way, which is a negative value, so I'm going to subtract a value from X, which is what minus equals means. Now I could specify a number of pixels, but you don't know how fast the game's going to run. If you've got a lot of stuff on screen, things slow down. Okay. Now, by default, the engine updates the sprites 100 times a second. So if I put 10 pixels, don't do this. I'm just going to run this and show you the effect. If I run this, that moved off the screen when the key thing was down. Let me run it again. Okay, the recording software makes it a bit jerky, but Right, but if the game was running faster, and I will just show you how, I'm just going to speed the game engine up. It's throttled at the minute, so I'm going to unthrottle it so it runs as fast as it can. I'm just going to show you how fast the game's running by changing this. Right, so unthrottled, that's running at nearly 3,000 frames a second. There's nothing on the screen now, that's why. So it's not. If I now press the key down, it's checking to see if the key's down 2,800 times a second. So it's probably going to fly off the screen quite quick. Alright. Everything's got to be frame dependent. So instead of just saying 10, what I need to do is I ask the event manager, because it keeps track of all the speeds, and we can say value per second. Right. What this turns this into is a pixels per second. So if I want something to move at 100 pixels per second, the event manager will give me what that fraction of time is, no matter how fast the game's running. So hopefully, if I run this now, even though I'm updating 2,700 times a second, it should only move 100 pixels in 1 second, he says. Okay, now I'm going to throttle it back, so it's back at its normal speeds. If I can find my throttle, GM it was in. So I'll set that back. Under most circumstances, you don't want to be unthrottling your game. And this should move at exactly the same speed. It's jerky because of the recording. Okay, so whenever you're wanting to move by specific values, always think in terms of pixels per second. Right, so I'm going to just speed that up a little bit because that's a bit slow. But I'm going to do the same. I'm going to copy and paste those two bits. And I'm going to put my right key in. And I'm going to say plus, because going to the right is adding to the X value. So I'll run that again. So now I can move my character left and right. Okay, I can do exactly the same for the Y. So I'm just going to copy paste those. The keys you use are up to you. So up is negative on the Y. So I've basically got 4 decisions that I'm checking. And the structure is the same, saying if there's a key down, do this action. If this key's down, do this action. If you held down the left and right keys, it shouldn't move. Okay, theoretically. I'll try that. Yeah, so it doesn't move because it's saying move left and then move right. That might be an issue with the game. It depends on how your game's going to work. It doesn't happen on a joystick because you can't physically hold left and right at the same time. There's actually some quite nice bugs in games when you start playing them in MAME because of things like that. And it cock them up. Because you couldn't physically do both at once. Which is quite weird. Okay, so that allows you to do that. So that's just a little controller. There are other ways of doing controllers. And there are other ways of checking the input and things like that. But that's what I'm going to show you. So you've got a basic sprite. Right. We've got a bit of time left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to change the graphic. Because you don't want a T. Unless you've got... That just happens to fit exactly with what your game's going to be. The T game or something. Right. You can review this again. Remember, I'm going to put this on YouTube, so that's not a problem. Right, so this line, where we got this frame. Okay, that's what we're going to change. In order to do it, we have got to do several steps. So we're going to add a graphic. So I need to create my graphic. So I'm just going to quickly create a sprite in Paint. Oh no, don't use Paint. I always do this. I need to use something that got transparent background. So I'm going to use Fireworks. Okay, transparency matters. If you're going to use Photoshop, make sure you export as PNG with a transparent background. So I'm just going to create a small sprite, 50 pixels by 50 pixels. I'm going to make sure the canvas is transparent. I'm just going to zoom that in so I can see. And I'm going to draw my character with my brush. Not that big a brush. So I've just created a little graphic. I'm now going to save that. Okay, so I'm going to go to where my project is. I just use fireworks. Don't worry about it too much, Ryan. Well, you can do a car, yeah. Right, so I'm going to save this into my project. So I'm going to go into content. Oh, the network's lagging, I don't know why. And I'm going to put it in my graphics folder. So it's going to be karate. I'm going to call this, because that's obviously what it is. It's a guy doing a karate kick. Right, in order to get this to work in the graphics folder, it's not there. Visual Studio doesn't know it exists because it's just a file that I've dumped in a folder. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say add existing item, go into my graphics folder and add my karate bloke. And you should see that it's worked there. Okay, so that's step one, adding the graphic. The next bit, I need to go into the file called assets and I need to create two things. First, a texture that's going to hold the graphic. So this is how you create a texture. So public state texture 2D. I'm going to put a prefix in front of it, TX. If you just watch what I'm doing and then when you watch the video back again, you'll be alright. So I'm going to call this karate. This is just one way of doing the textures. So that's just a storage space for it. I then need to go down to probably the most minging bit of code. Don't know why I did it this way, but it doesn't matter. I'm trying to make it easy for you. And I'm going to... This loads another graphic in that we aren't using, but I'm going to copy that line. I don't want this progress bar thing. The only thing you need to change is this bit that says, right, when the graphic's been loaded, place it in that texture, which I just created. And then the other thing I've got to change is I've got to put the file name to load. So it's karate, and you don't put the extension. .fw is not an extension, that's just some stupid thing that Fireworks puts in as part of the file name. The PNG is the extension, don't put that in. Okay? Now, what that'll do is that'll load at the start, where you see that loading thing, that bit, that's loaded those assets up. There's a sound asset that gets loaded as well. Okay? Now that should be ready to use. If you get a file name not found, you've spelt something wrong. Okay? Or you didn't put it in the graphics folder when you've said graphics folder there. Okay? Now to use it, all I've got to do is say, well, instead of that, just say gm.tx karate. Now, and that's it. So that's saying use that texture for my geezer. Practically Street Fighter 2. You only need a little bit of animation and a bit of thought and a bit of like imagination and you've got Street Fighter. Honestly. Okay, right, I'll put that one up on YouTube. But you've got to play. It's all about playing. I'll come around and fix some problems.